Okay, Shavua Tov.
Yeah, the guy starts just in between. It's one that says 6:50, the other 6:55, and he's coming 6:52. So he gets right on time.
Oh, it says six. Where does it say 6:55 in the bulletin?
Oh, and the bulletin yesterday's yesterday morning's bulletin 6:55. Yesterday afternoon bulletin 6:50.
I'll give it 3 minutes. I'll be patient for everyone. James, I have no objection to tomorrow doing it at 8 o'clock. Let's see what others say.
I think it'd be the perfect halftime show.
How do you know the halftime's at 8 o'clock? They scheduled that way?
It's about 8 o'clock. I mean, that's, the game's about 3 hours long.
I thought it's all rigged ahead of time.
You might know more than I do.
Maybe we could ask them just for Daf Yomi's sake if they could tell us.
I just saw that OU was putting on a halftime thing at 8 o'clock, so I thought that'd be.
Okay. I'm fine with it. Let's propose the time. See what everyone else says. But give me 1 minute. I'm gonna turn off my. We're gonna start in 2 minutes, God willing. So you have 2 minutes.
What stuff are we doing today?
Today is 100 kuf. But it's a very short daf, thankfully, or not thankfully. And we're gonna start. We actually only got around halfway down 99b, or 2/3 of the way down. So we got a little ground to cover.
You can review the Tosafot since you have time.
Sorry. Okay, I'm back. I think we should get started. Hopefully others will be able to join if they can. But it's 6:55. So the time has come. So today's daf is daf kuf. Hopefully you can hear me clearly. Daf 100 in Masechet Bava Kamma. And he told me, I think, it said in the message that he got to, I believe, Amar Rabba Bar Barchana, which is it's really around halfway down, a little more than halfway down of the medium wide lines on Daf Tzadi Tet Amabet. And so just to catch up real quickly, the previous thing that we just said is, and what this parak has been discussing with, is really the concept of gzeila, of stealing. And one category of stealing is not walking into someone's house only and taking something. It's if someone mistreats your object and ruins it, right? They ruined your thing via dime. That's called hezek or geneva, essentially. And so we've been discussing what happens if you give it to someone. It says the Gemara today, which is going to be a little bit different than what we said yesterday. Amar Rabba Bar Barchana Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Tabach Uman. Let's say you have a butcher who's an expert as opposed to a non-expert. So the assumption now is that if you're not an expert and you say, oh, sure, I'll be happy to fix your car for you, and then I mess it up, I have to pay you because I was a fool to take on that responsibility when I don't know what I'm doing. But what if you are an expert, right? So you're a butcher, you're an expert, and you go to slaughter the animal, and you mess up, and the animal becomes a treifa, right? Which was unfortunately a hazard of slaughtering animals. It could be puzzle. So a tabach uman shekilkel, he ruins up the animal, and so it's not edible. It's it's very low value. Chayav, that person has to pay the person who he took the animal from because he was hired to do a job. He messed it up. He's got to pay. Even if he's a really high level expert, not just like a amateur, but even like the butchers of Tzipori, who are very big experts, you got to pay. Is that true? Rabbi Rechana, who was obviously a student of Rabbi Yochanan, reported, Uvda havi kamed Rabbi Yochanan bikinishta de me'on. There was a story in front of Rabbi Yochanan in the Kinishta, in the Beit Knesset of Me'on, which was a city, that Rabbi Yochanan was there and people were coming to him asking him certain questions. And someone actually came to him and said, not so clear what he asked him, but he basically said, I'm a butcher. I slaughtered someone's animal and messed it up. And they want me to pay, but I was an expert. Marle, and Rabbi Yochanan said to this guy, Zil aiti raya de mamchita golim. Bring a proof, bring your certificate that shows that you're an expert to slaughter chickens. V'aftarich, and I'll make you puzzle. So you see Rabbi Yochanan there basically said that if you have a government certificate or a rabbinic certificate that says that you're an expert for this, and you acted within your license to practice, as we put it, and you made a mistake, you're not responsible because that's the people give it to you. They understand. There's rare exceptions. There's rare mistakes. So why would Rabbi Yochanan name Rabbi Yochanan say you're chayiv if you're a butcher? Lokasha answers the Gemara, kan bechinam, kan b'stachar. It really depends on whether you're getting paid or not. And just like if you're a shomer, if you're supposed to watch something, right, as we had in this week's parsha today, if you're a shomer chinam, your responsibility is less than if you're a shomer sachar, right? In both cases, you agreed to watch it, but the level of responsibility that you take in one case is greater than the other. The same thing is true about a workman. If you're being paid to butcher it, to slaughter it, then your responsibility for mistakes is higher. And if you mess up and it gets a treifa, then or a nevela, you gotta pay. But if you're doing it for free, then it's as if you stole it or lost it, right? By screwing up, by messing up, and you don't have to pay. And so Rabbi Yochanan made the distinction between whether you are being paid to do your work, in which case you're chayav for mistakes, or you're doing it for free, in which case you're putter for mistakes.
Isn't there a concept of informed consent if someone knows there are risks and benefits involved and so forth?
Not exactly. This is the equivalent of informed consent. I think a question that is not so clear is what if you override this? What if you go into it and saying, I know that normally the halacha is that I would have to pay you, but I only want to give it to you on condition that I don't, right? You do something of that nature. So it's not clear if you can or can't, but the Gemara doesn't seem to be talking about, seems to be talking about what are the general rules. And the general rules, according to Rabbi Yochanan, which is not what we said yesterday, just to be clear, but the general rule of Rabbi Yochanan, which is, I think, the way you paskin, is that if you're being paid, you accept responsibility. And if you make a mistake, even if you're an expert and you make a mistake, you've got to pay the person whose animal it was. If you are an amateur, then you got to pay even if you're doing it for free, potentially. He didn't discuss that yet.
The same thing is true in America. No, if you take your car in to get fixed, maybe the mechanic breaks it, the mechanic's responsible.
Yeah, James, you're very faint, but I think I agree with that point. I think you extrapolated this to the mechanic as I did before. Yeah, so it'd be the same idea. If you brought it in, again, but there might be levels of expert mechanics that could even be putter, but Rabbi Yochanan did not differentiate between them.
It's also the
Sorry.
expert,
Yeah.
From Hori, you would think the experts would be more associated with coyote and not birds.
Oh, so it's an interesting question. I skirted over that because it's not so clear. Is that what he's talking about here, right? The simplest explanation is that this was a different case where the person slaughtered birds. But there actually are some who say that, in fact, you don't actually, that all he was saying was prove you can at least slaughter a bird, so you're not a pure amateur. And that's enough to get you putter even from an animal. Just because, there's, at least you know something. You're not a total know nothing, but it's not clear. Anyways, but I think that's a separate detail. But the point that Rabbi Yochanan made is that if you get paid, you have higher responsibility and you're chayav for mistakes. And if you're doing it for free and you're an expert, then the person understands when they give it to you, right? If you go to a person and say, do me a favor and fix my car and I'm not paying you, that you're basically asking less of them than if you were. And continues the Gemara, Yad Amar Reb Zera. Reb Zera actually explicitly stated this. He said, Harotzeshi yitchayev lo tabach. Look, you go to the butcher and you're afraid this guy might not, be perfect with your animal. So you want him to be chayiv if he makes a mistake. Yakdim lo dinar. You should pay him up front, right? Because once you pay him, he becomes a worker for you, and he's chayav for further things. So pay your money. Mate, they asked the Gemara, what about the following Braita? A Braita says, Hamolech chitin l'tchon. You go, again, these are all very common things up till I think, very recently, till we had machines, right? You would take your grain to a whatever you call it, the place where where they grind it, the mill house maybe, and you'd give it to them to grind it, right? The lo lititan, and they make a mistake in the process, and they don't do litita. Litita is a process we had earlier of washing it, right? So you have to wash the grain, and otherwise, when you grind it, it doesn't get to be very fine flour. The asan subin, it became subin, which is very coarse flour. They translate as bran. I don't know what bran is, but I guess very coarse flour. Oh, morsin's even thicker, right? Or you give kemach lenachtom, you give your bread to the baker, which again, they didn't all have ovens in their house. So you take your bread that you made, you bring it to the baker, make bread for me. Vasu patni pulin, and they made it into falling down bread or matzah. You come back and you get matzah, which is not what you wanted. Behema tabach v'nifla, or you bring your animal to the butcher to shecht and he makes it a nevela. All these cases says the right to your chayav. Okay, now that could be consistent. Because we treat you as if you're getting paid. Now, that's a big contradiction to Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan said you're only chayav if you're getting paid, not if you're not getting. If you do it for free, you're not chayav. So what do you mean? It's as if you're getting paid. Or if you're not getting paid, you should be patur. This is where you're right. What the Braita means to say, Ema nipnei shehu nosei sachar, doesn't mean as if you got paid. It means because you got paid. So since you got paid, and that's what Rabbi Yochanan said, when you get paid, you are chayav for damages if you cause damage. Continues the Gemara. We are now around 10 lines up.
Rabbi Yochanan holds that if he doesn't get paid at all, he's patur.
If he's an expert and he doesn't get paid, he's patur.
Only if he's an expert.
Correct. Only if he's an expert. So if you go to a regular person, they make a mistake, then you're chayav. If you go to an expert, you're basically grist mill. Interesting. You're basically trusting them, and there's a level that you accept. Again, it's very similar to shmirah, right? When you give someone something to watch for you, if you do it for free, you expect they're going to watch it. But if they lose it, they don't have to pay you as long as they swear that they lost it, right? But if you're paying them, they have a higher level of responsibility. Continues the Gemara, Hahu magrumta. There was a case of an animal that was magrumta. Magrumta means where you basically you did shchita. We talked about this in Chulin. You're supposed to shecht between the cartilage, right, between the rings of the trachea. Magrumta is where you drag the knife through the rings and you make it a treifa according to some manda amrim. So you basically didn't slaughter it completely correctly, and therefore it's puzzle according to many, but not according to everybody. It's a machloket in Chulin. So there was a case of an animal that someone brought to a butcher, asked him to slaughter it, and he messed up the shechita so that he caused it to be a magrumta. And they brought the animal to Atayah Kamei de Rav. They brought this case in front of Rav to ask Rav, A, is the animal kosher? And B, does the butcher have to pay me? And Rav said, tarfei, it's a treifa, you can't eat it. And B, patre the tabach min l'shlumei dmei, right? They pattered the butcher from actually having to pay. So he said the butcher did what he could do, and therefore he's patur from paying. So that was the case. Now, Pagu be Rav Kahana Rav Asi Bahu Gavra, right? Both Rav Kahana and Rav Asi were students of Rav, bumped into this guy walking out of court, very sad because he lost his case. Amrulay, and they said to him, Avad bicha Rav Tarti. Rav did two things to you. Now, it sounds negative when we're saying it initially. Rav messed you up twice, basically, right? My Tarti, what are the two? That it means what we think it means, that it's two negative things, meaning because first of all, I should have told you, no problem. You can eat the animal because there's an opinion that says that this is not a treifa. And instead, he was tarfei Rabbanan. He said like the Rabbanan, which is a machmir opinion, that it's a treifa. That's one, thing he messed you up with. And the second thing is that if he's going to pass like the Rabbanan and say it's a treifa, inami Rabbanani by le he should have at least made the tabach paid you back. So Rav said, A, you can't eat it, and B, you don't have to pay, right? So he did two things that sort of messed you up. So is that what they were saying? Obviously, there are a lot of criticizing. We're not asking, can they criticize Rav? But Mishari, Lemeimarki Haigavna, are Talmidei Chachamim or judges in the court allowed to, after the din, go to the plaintiff and say, sorry, it turned out against you. I voted for you. There's a Beferisha Bright of Atanya. We are 2, 4, 6, 8 lines from the bottom from 99b. Likisha Yetzei, when the judges leave court, right, after making a decision, lo yomar, they're not supposed to go to the plaintiffs and say, Ani mizakeh v'chaveri mechayvin. Sorry, I thought you were innocent, right? It's just everyone else voted against you. You're not allowed to do that and imply like, don't hold it against me. Aval ma eseh shechaveru rabu alai. What could I have done? Everyone voted against you. It's a negative thing. You go out, you're telling rumors, you're revealing secrets. If you go to court and you're a quorum, then whatever the quorum paskins, that's what you do. You can't go afterwards and say, "Oh, I would have done differently." So how could these rabbanan have said that? Ella, they couldn't have meant that. What they meant was tarti lemal yuta. Rav did you two favors when he paskins. So you're so sad that Rav said you can't eat your animal and no one has to pay you. In fact, that was two favors Rav did for you because, first of all, look, you would have eaten it. Obviously, it's very hard to let go of a big, expensive cow, but it's a safek isur, and Rav was saving you from eating it. And furthermore, he prevented you from stealing. If you had gone to the butcher and said, "Oh, you got to pay me," if it was the wrong thing halachically, then obviously taking something from someone under false or incorrect pretenses is essentially gezela. And Rav saved you from that by telling you the halacha, which is the correct halacha, that since you paid the butcher, that's what we're assuming here, and the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan, therefore you don't get reimbursed for mistakes that they made. Continues the Gemara. We are now 6 lines from the bottom, I think, 7 lines. The next case, remember, this is talking about a shochet who messes up. What about someone who messes up without doing an act? Itmar, says the Gemara, Hamar'ed dinar l'shulchani. Right? This was also very common thing in the Gemara and probably in old times. Charlie could tell us more about it if he was here, right? You had a coin, but not all coins were good, right? Because a couple of reasons. They could, first of all, be minted poorly, right? So meaning it says it's silver, but it's not silver. Or it could be guaranteed by a certain government, and that government could not be in existence, right? So if it's backed by the full, force of the USSR, let's say, right, it's not going to be very valuable anymore, right? So you take your coin and you bring it to an expert who will tell you, is this a valid coin? Is it the right shape? Is it the right weight? And you go to your shulchan and he says, yes, this is a $10, diamond, whatever, coin, not diamond, it's gold coin. And then it turns out that he's wrong. It turns out that it's a bad coin and it's worthless. So you basically agreed to this deal because of someone's guarantee, and it turned out they were false, right? So Tanichada, so one Braita says, one statement says, Uman patur. Look, if you're an expert, you're patur. Why are you patur? Again, it's like fixing the car. You understand that some people make mistakes, but this person was an expert. They were commenting on what they thought was best, and therefore they're not responsible for a mistake that they made. But a hedyot would be chayav. But if you were just an individual and you took it upon yourself to pretend you know what you're talking about and you don't know what you're talking about, then you've got to pay the person for the loss that he suffered. That's one Braita. There's another Braita that says, Bein Uman, Bein Hedyot. Chayav. No, you're chayav whether you're an Uman or you're an Hedyot, right? Either way. Says Rav Papa, you know how to explain this? Kitanya Uman Patur. When we said that if you're an expert, you're Patur, that is Kigon Dinachu, right? That it is, Kigon Dinachu. Danko V'Isar. It's referring to these super experts, that was their names, Danko and Isar, and these were people who were super experts in coins. So they knew exactly what they were looking at. And so basically, although they were wrong, just to be clear, they made a mistake that was, you're able to rely on them, and therefore we're going to ask in a second, but you're able to rely on them, okay? So because of that, they don't have to pay. Delo, let me read the words inside. Danko v'isar, they don't need to learn anything, meaning they know exactly what they're doing. And they made, so they didn't know what they're doing, and therefore you can rely on them. Says, well, they made a mistake though, right? So what was the mistake? Well, the mistake they made was not in the coin itself, how valuable it was. They made a mistake because there was a new minting, right? Again, the government's changed. They threw out one coin, they have a new coin that they couldn't have known about. And that's a mistake that's unavoidable. But they didn't make a mistake about evaluating the actual coin in front of them, and therefore they're patur. There was a time where there was a new minting, a new leadership, and led to new coins. Now there's a similar case, 4 lines from the bottom. A woman, she brought her cases, she had coins, right, that were left to her, that someone said are worth $1,000. She doesn't know if they are. So she brought them in front of Rabbi Chia, who was an expert in coins because he was a Talmud Chacham. So he was a multi-knowledge expert. Amrlan, he said to her, Al Yehu, they're great. These are great coins. Wonderful. Lamachar, of course, it comes out. She comes to him. Atay lekamev amrlei achzite. Right? I showed them to someone else. Amrlei bishu. And I went to the store to buy, my new couch, and they told me they're bad, and they didn't give me anything. Right? V'amrlei bishu v'lakanafikli. And they wouldn't use them. They wouldn't allow me to use them. So they're worthless. So Rav Chia said, I'm really sorry. Amar le the Rav. So he said to Rav, who was his student, right, or his contemporary, really, his student, Zil chalfe nihila, switch them for her. Take these bad coins from her and give her good coins from my account. The ketova pinkasi, and write in my ledger, Dain esik bish. We had a bad business deal, right? It was a bad transaction because I have to pay her. I told her that they were good. She relied on me, and I got to pay her. That's the Gemara. Isn't Rav Chia an expert? Maishna, Danko, Isur Dipatiri. Why is it these two experts, Danko and Isur, are putter, right? Because because they don't need to learn anything more, meaning they know the material. So they are basing it on good knowledge. Rabbi Chia Nami. So Rabbi Chia also obviously knew everything. We make this assumption. The Gemara doesn't question it. Not lav the Migmar Kabai. Rabbi Chia lifnim mishurat hadin hu David. Rabbi Chia did not have to give this money back. But he was going beyond the true din, as Talmidei Chachamim often do. He felt bad about what happened. And although halachically he did not have to pay her, he said, I will pay her. Kedetani Rav Yosef, as Rav Yosef said, and this is the pasuk of, remember Yisro, when he came to Moshe, said, V'hodata lahem et haderech asher yelchu bo, you'll teach them the path to go on. And we darshan, V'hodata lahem means you'll teach them zebeit chayim. You're going to teach them, turn to the top of Daf Kuf finally, you'll teach them the way to live, which is, Rashi says, the way to learn Torah, right? How to follow the rules. Et haderech, the way to go, remember the path you walk on. Zug milot chasadim, that's referring to teaching people about how to be kind. Yelchu, zubikur cholim, to go is to visit people. Ba, right, zug fura, this is that you do a mitzvah of burying people. And et ha'maaseh, tell them how to act, that's din, that's the proper halacha. But then he continues, Yitro, and says, Asher Ya'asun, the thing you do is extra to tell you, not only should you do the letter of the law, or you should even do the Fnim Mishurat Hadin. You should act beyond the letter of the law, and that's why Rabbi Chia paid this woman back, not because he had to, but because he wanted to make her whole, Lifnim Mishurat Hadin. Continues the Gemara on the fourth line of Daf Kuf, Reish Lakish, Achvi Le'din Rabbi Elazar. Reish Lakish had money. He didn't know if it was good money or not, if it was going to be accepted. So he showed it to Rabbi Elazar, who was an expert in coins. Amar, and he said to him, Ma'al Yehu, it's great. Okay, these are good coins. I checked them out. They taste right. I don't know how they check coins exactly. They weighed right. They look right. They feel right. They're useful. Amar Le, so Rabbi Lakish said to Rabbi Elazar, okay, Chazi, dalech kasamichna. I just want you to know, I'm going to rely on you, right? I hope you're sure, right? Because I'm taking this to the bank. Amalei, so Rebbe Elazar said back to him, so what do you mean you're relying on me? Kisamichta alai, my lememra. What are you trying to say? Right? What do you mean you're relying on me? Are you saying that if you find out tomorrow that these are bad coins, when you go to the bank to use them, that you're going to come back to me and I'm going to pay you good coins? Was that what you're saying, says Rebbe Elazar? But the truth is, says Rebbe Elazar, if that's the case, right, let's say I'm assuring you now, these are good coins, okay? You go and you buy them. You go tomorrow and you find out you can't use these coins. So I've caused you damage. It's true I've caused you damage, but that's a grumma, right? That's indirect damage because I didn't take your thing and ruin it. I didn't harm your thing. I told you that you should do it and you relied on me to do it. And that's called dina digarmi, right? Grumma is indirect damage. That's called indirect damage. I told you to do it or I showed you can do it, but I didn't physically cause damage to you. You're the one, Reish Lakish, who says, oh, Dina Degarmi, judging people based on indirects, that's Rabbi Meir's opinion. And we understood that to mean that you don't paskin that way, that Rabbi Meir holds that, but not everybody else. And now you're saying, oh, if it turns out that you lose your money on the coins because of my psak, you're going to come collecting from me. But that's not direct damage, that's indirect damage. And you made it sound like we don't paskin, that you can accept that you have to pay indirect damage. My love, Rabbi Meir, velo svir lan kavate, right? Presumably what you meant was Rabbi Meir holds of Dina Digarmi, but we don't hold like Rabbi Meir. Answered Reish Lakish, no, Amrle lo. What I meant to say was, Rabbi Meir is the Tana who says that you are da'in Dina Digarmi, that you judge indirect things to be responsible. This Sfira lan kavate, and that's how we paskin. And therefore, if it turns out that you're wrong, right, Rabbi Elazar, and that this money is good money, then I am going to come to you to collect. I'm sorry, bad money. Unlike what you said, then I'm going to come to you to collect. And that is what Rish Lakish said to Rabbi Elazar. I asked the Gemara halfway through Daf Kuf, the short Amud. Hi, Rabbi Meir. Where did Rabbi Meir say that we are da'in dina digarmi? Remember, dina digarmi means indirect damage, right? Where I cause damage to you, but not through a physical act of my own. Where did Rabbi Meir say that that's considered to be damage also, and you can potentially collect from that person? Ilema Rabbi Meir ditznan. There's a Mishnah in Sanhedrin which says the following: Danet adin. Let's say the justice paskins the rule, right? And zika tachayav, and they mess up. They're mizakeh, they make innocent the one who's truly guilty, right? Ruvain claims that Shimon owes him $100. They come to court. Ruvain really owes whatever. Shimon really owes Ruvain $100, and the judge says it's wrong. He doesn't have to pay you. So you have made a person who is chayav innocent, right? Ruvain, who had to pay the money, you said you don't have to pay. Or you're chayav et zakah. You do the opposite, right? You say to someone who really doesn't have to pay, you've got to pay $100. So you did the wrong halacha. Or timeat tahar, something which is tahar, you paskin that's tamei and it's got to be thrown away, right? Let's say it's a whole pile of truma, and you said, oh, this case is it's tamei, and you were wrong. It was found out that you were wrong. Or tihara to tamei, or the opposite. You took something that was tamei and you said it was tahar. In all these cases, says the Mishnah in Sanhedrin, masha asasoy. What the judge said goes, right? If the judge said that Ruvain doesn't have to pay the $100, even if it turned out he was wrong, Ruvain doesn't have to pay the $100. But Yishalemi Beito. But the judge has to pay Shimon the $100 because it's due to his ruling that Shimon didn't collect what he should have collected from Ruvain. So you listen to his ruling, you rely on court, but you got to pay back. So that's clearly grami, because if right, it's not happening directly. He's making a psak. He's saying to treat something some way. He's not actually taking money from one and giving it to the other. So and Rabbi Meir. Now it's not Rabbi Meir here, but it's Stam Mishnah, which we assume is Rabbi Meir. So that seems to imply that it's even though it's indirect, you got to pay.
How do we know that? Is it based on appeal?
There's no
based on an appeal. How do we find out in the end that this judge is wrong? Can someone appeal the decision and it comes back to the judge?
Yeah, so it's a good question. The Gemara, we'll talk about this in Sanhedrin. We're coming up to it. So I was going to say it's been 7 years since we learned it. But the Gemara talks about where more evidence either comes out or they actually bring it to other people and they go through the facts. So it's essentially an appeal, but it's not an official appeal because we don't revisit the case, as we're saying here. We realize that he's wrong, but you don't change the ruling as long as he was a professional judge, but you make him pay from his house. Okay? Says the Gemara, but that's not really grama, because Itmarla, we learned in Sanhedrin that it's not talking about the cases I just gave you where the judge said something. It's where the judge physically did it, right? Where he walked up to Ruvain and took, let's say Ruvain says, Shimon said Ruvain borrowed $100 from him, right? And Shimon has Ruvain's mashkon, Ruvain's guarantee in his house. And the judge comes and says, I void this loan. You don't have to pay him back. And he takes the thing from Shimon and hands it back to Ruvain. So he actually caused Shimon to lose biyadayim, not indirectly. And that's why he's got to pay. And the Gemara in Sanhedrin goes through all the cases, but how, he said, look, this thing is tamei. And just to make sure you know that, he took a sheretz, right, which is tamei, and put it on top of the food. So the judge, basically ensured that his ruling would be carried out physically, in which case that's why he's chayav to pay. So read that inside. The reason the judge is chayav is because he actually took the thing and handed it over, or ruined it for the other person. So that's not a proof that we have dina digarmi. Elaha Rabbi Meir. It's the following Rabbi Meir from the Mishnah, which is our Mishnah later today. It's not. And the Mishnah is going to say in like 3 minutes, if you give your wool to a dyer and you say, can you please make this into a red coat? Okay. And a red wool so I can make a coat. And you come back a week later and he gives you a spool of black wool, right? So he dyed it the wrong color. So you gave it to him with swallow edom, v'tzavo shachar, or shachar v'tzavo edom. You give it to him to dye black and he dyed it red. So in these cases, Rabbi Meir says, no tain lo demei simro, right? You give him the value of the wool because basically you stole his wool. He told you to make it red. You made it black. You took it from him. You got to pay him like you stole anything else. Now, that seems to be indirect. Now, Tosfos is like, what do you mean that's indirect? You dyed it the wrong color. So Tosfos explains that when you dye something, you don't actually give color to it right away, right? If you put something in the color and you take it out 3 seconds later, you can wash it off and it won't be dyed. You have to leave it in the vat for a few days. Let's say Tosfos says 2 or 3 days. And therefore, it happens on its own over that time. So that seems to be somewhat indirect. And interesting where that's not indirect at all, right? Hatam ka'ava biyadayim. What are you talking about? You put it in the vat, right? You dyed it the wrong color, and that's why you got to pay. Elahar Rebbe Meir. What about the following Mishnah of Rebbe Meir? Titzanan, there's a Mishnah in Kilayim that says the following. Remember, you're not allowed to mix 2 different types of grain, especially wheat and grapes, right? And if you do, they become Kilayim, you got to throw them away. So let's say there's a guy who's got a beautiful wheat field, and another guy comes and plants a vineyard and drapes his grapes on top of the wheat field so that they grow down and grow into the wheat field. So he's basically caused kilayim in someone else's field and ruined his grain. But he hasn't done it so directly, right? Because all he did was planted the grapes. They grew on their own, essentially. So the Mishnah says,
No, he knows it could have happened. That's really direct.
We'll keep going. The Gemara will answer that, but that's the question, the thought here. If you sukkah, you cover up your friend's field of grain with your vineyard, meaning you cause it, you put up spikes or however you do a vineyard, right? You cause it to spread over. Hareze kidesh, that makes the grain into kilayim. Kidesh is the word we always use for kilayim, right? It's asur, kidesh. Grama, you just planted it. You didn't actually put it there. Answers the Gemara what you said, which of course is true. Hatanami ka'ava biyadayim. Well, you planted it and you made it grow there on purpose. Ella, there's the following case, which we're actually leading up to this case. Ha Rebbe Meir, Ditznan or Titania. The Braita says the following. Let's say, this is an interesting halacha that we talked about and we'll talk about more in Bava Batra and elsewhere. Let's say 2 people have fields next to each other, right? One person plants a wheat field and one person plants a vineyard. So those are fine as long as they're not overlapping, right? The Gemara the Mishnah actually talks about how much space you're supposed to leave between fields. And mainly it's not for kilayim, it's mainly so that you can work around your field. You don't have to step in someone else's field. And you're supposed to make 4 amot around your field, but if you make a fence, that might be okay, right? Because the fence is a physical barrier between the 2 fields. So let's say you have one man has a wheat field, one person has a wheat field, one person has a vineyard. They're right next to each other, but there's a nice fence between them. That's totally fine. But then the fence falls down, right? Says the Braita, mechitzat hakerem, you have a fence around your vineyard, shenifritza, that is broken into, right? It gets broken, it falls open. Continues the Gemara on top of Daf Kuf Amud Bet. Amarlo, they say to the person, Gidor, right? They say to the person, you should what's it called? You should fix it. Nifritzat remains broken. Amarlo Gadol, they say, make your fence. Nityaesh mimenu velo gadra. The person gives up. He says, I don't care. I'm not fixing the fence. And the vineyard then overlaps with the wheat field. Hareze kidesh. Then it causes the wheat to become kilayim, the grapes also, but the wheat to become kilayim, and therefore they're usser. And says the Braita, chayav b'achrayuto. Then you've got to pay the person, even though you did nothing, right? You planted your grapes and it was completely permissible. He planted his wheat, which was completely permissible. You built a fence, which was appropriate. And then the fence fell down. Now the fence fell down and they go to you and they say, rebuild the fence. And you said, I don't feel like it. I'm not doing it. So there, because of your negligence of not rebuilding your fence, his grain became prohibited, but that is considered to be indirect. And Rebbe Meir, now we didn't mention Rebbe Meir, just to be clear, the Tosfos on Nomen Aleph talks about how we assume it's Rebbe Meir, or the other Braita are Rebbe Meir, and then we say, this is the opinion of Rebbe Meir, that you are da'in dina digarmi, that indirect loss is considered to be significant, and therefore you have to pay, and that's the way Reish Lakish paskined, and therefore Reish Lakish said that if you go to a person and say to him, can you check out my coins? And he says, sure, they are good coins. You can say to that person, you should know that if you're wrong, you're going to have to pay me for any damage that resulted. And that's where we conclude to the Mishnah.
Well, didn't we say that a fee Meshut Adin?
No, so not necessarily if the Mishurat Adin in this case. It's a good question as to where we are and how indirect it is, and whether, again, these questions all come up, which you mentioned earlier, whether it was spoken out beforehand. And that's what Reish Lakish said to him. He said, I want you to know I'm relying on you, and if you're wrong, you're going to have to pay me. Do you still say your opinion? And then presumably you still have to.
Now, in this case with the fence, it would depend on who erected the fence, right? Well, which party of the the owner of which field erected that fence?
Correct. So that is correct. I mean, well, it's a whole other discussion about, remember, which grain moves more, but remember that grapes generally move more than wheat. So yes, but there is a discussion about who erected the fence, and when you planted the grapes, you had to, if you planted them when there was already a fence there, that's what allowed you to plant the grapes up to the edge, right? Otherwise, you would have been prohibited from doing that. But correct. It depends on whose fence it was. Tosas actually does point out on Amud Aleph that the Rif, the Rabbi Alphys points, Paskins, that you're only chayav in Reish Lakish's case if you say what Reish Lakish said. Meaning if you, as you said earlier, if you make a condition and say explicitly, I want you to know I'm relying on you, and if you're wrong, you're going to have to pay. And the guy says, okay, I accept that. That's where you'd have to pay. But otherwise, it would only be lifnim mishurat adin, as we said in the other case. Continues the Mishnah, and again, this is a Mishnah we quoted several times, including around 3 minutes.
It's only in
10 minutes
cases
ago.
of free advice. If you're paying, then he would be responsible, right?
So if you're paying, no. So the again, I don't rely on this practically, but what we said so far today is that in terms of coins, if you're paying, you're not responsible, and you're an expert, you're not responsible. Remember, the difference between a coin and a butcher is that a butcher actually does it with his hands. And if he makes it in a nevela, he's physically making it in a nevela. The thing about a coin is that a coin is only a grama, right? A coin is indirect because he's saying to you something, but he's not actually physically making it a bad coin. He's telling you yes or no.
There's no difference between a hinam and a paid.
So by coins, we said that if he's an expert, then if you pay him, then he's chayav, and if you don't pay him, he's not chayav. And if he's an amateur, then he's chayav either way. But what the Gemara then added is that if he's a really big expert, then you're probably not chayav, except in the case of Reish Lakish, where you said to them potentially, and so I'm pulling together all the Gemara, assuming they all agree with each other, and unless you said to him, I'm relying on you and I'm going to be mechayev you if, and he says that's okay, I accept that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Continues the Mishnah, again, we've quoted this, Hanotein Semer L'Tzava. You give your wool to the dyer and you say, I'd like you to make this wool, this beautiful wool, into a red color. The hikticho yoret, and they burn it in the pot, right, in the vat, right? So that's the way you dye. At least they used to dye things in the Gemara's time. Is that you would heat it up, but they heated it up too much, and the whole thing burnt, and it's ruined. There's no more wool left, right? So says the Mishnah, "Notein lo demeit simro." So the dyer has to pay you for your wool. He took your wool, he ruined it. He's got to pay it. If he's tzavok ka'or, what if he does a bad job? So tzavok ka'or means he dyes it lightly, right? Ka'or can either mean ugly or light. But basically, we're going to say in the Gemara in a minute that you use like bad dye, you use cheap dye. And so it turns out to be very faint, right? I wanted it red and I got an ugly red. So he did what I asked him to do, but he did a bad job of it. Says the Mishnah, Im hashevach yeter al yitzia. You have to see how much this dye job has improved the value of the wool, right? Let's say the wool was worth $100 raw. And I gave it to the dyer. This is very complicated machloka. It's very interesting, but very complicated. I give it to the dyer and I say, look, I'll pay you $100 to make it, beautiful red. And I go to the dyer and I give it to him and he does a terrible job and he gives it back to me and it's this dull, ugly red. But it still is better than raw wool, right? It's not worth $200 maybe, or $300 or whatever I was hoping. But let's say it's worth $150 now instead of $100. So that's the shevach. The shevach is how much is it added value from the dye. The yitzia means how much did the dyer spend on doing that? How much did it cost him to buy dyes and do that kind of stuff? Let's say it cost him $25 of raw material, right? So in that case, ima shevach yeter al yitzia, if the value that's gone up of the wool is more than the cost, the expenditure of the dyer, then I have to pay him. Notein lo ati yitzia. I have to pay him what he paid, $25, and I keep my wool, and I get, so basically yado al yonah. Right, my hand is stronger because I was messed up. I didn't get what I wanted. But ima yitzia yeter al shevach. Let's say he spent $50 to do this terrible dye job, and it only went up in value by $20. So then I only have to pay him what it went up in value. Notein lo ata shevach.
Wouldn't you have to pay him for the difference?
To So that's the different meaning. Again, you gave him some, let's just say the Demei Tzemer is 100. Let's just say this is very complex, just to be clear. But you gave him 100 with the Tzemer, and now he gave it back to you, and it's not what you wanted, right? And that's demonstrable that it's not what you wanted, but it's worth say $150. So he did a bad job. You wanted it to be worth $500, right? That's why you gave it to him. But now it's worth 150. So then you, by getting your wool back, you've gained $50. Right. The question is how that's the shevach, $50 is shevach. The question is how much did he spend? So you might think you have to pay him $50, but you don't. You have to pay him either his expenditure, which is say $20, $30, whatever, or if it's less, or if he spent more, right? Let's say he spent $100 to do this bad job and it only improved it by $50. You don't have to pay him the $100. You only have to pay him $50, which is what you actually gained from the work that he did.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
Yeah, one of the big questions that comes up, Rashi here and the Rambam and others, is actually how you view his yitziyah. Do you view what I just said, which is the Rambam seems to say, which is the value of what he invested into it, or do you look at his time and effort, right? Which is a whole more complicated thing, right? Because he might have put a lot of effort into making your thing not very valuable, right? So do you pay? Rashi seems to imply that you pay for his effort. So that, again, how you calculate his costs is a little bit of a debate, but either way, we're talking about cost and benefit. Now, the third case in the Mishnah is, let's say you give it to the dyer, litzva lo edom, to dye red, and he just does it wrong, right? He dyes it black, mitzavo shachar, or you give it to him to dye black, shachar, mitzavo edom, right? So he does a great job. It's beautiful, but he did the wrong thing. So says Rabbi Meir, notein lo temet simro. Says Rabbi Meir, remember, he did uman koneh b'shevach kli, right? The expert is koneh by changing it. He took your thing. He did something different. He increased the value. It's as if he stole it, and he just gives you back as if he took the wool from you. So he doesn't give you anything at this point. He doesn't give you back your thing. He just pays you for the value of your wool, and he keeps the rest. Maybe he'll get bad reviews on Yelp, right? But he keeps the rest. It says Rabbi Yehuda, no, I disagree. And this is how we paskin, that it's the same as the earlier case. You look at the shevach, how much is the wool worth? Ima shevach yeter al yitziyah. If the value is greater than the yitziyah, this is where Rashi gets into this complicated case, because the question is, what's the yitziyah, right? But let's say the value of this wool is worth more now than the amount it costs to make it go up in value, which seems that it should be obvious. But let's just say that's the case, right? So it's black wool, it's worth $300, and he spent $100 to improve it. Then notein lo ata yitziyah. Then you pay the worker what his cost was. If the actual cost was more than the value, he put in, $500 of work to make this beautiful black thread, and you show up and you say, that's a great job, but I'm not interested in black thread, right? I wanted red, and no one wants black thread. There's no market for it. It's only worth $100. Then you don't have to pay him his cost. You only have to pay him what it's actually worth, the thing that he gave you back, and what value he added to that thing. Now, why does Rabbi Yehuda say that? So one opinion of Rabbi Yehuda is that, remember, we had the whole case earlier that dyeing is not considered to be permanent, right? And so that it really, basically, you can undo it, and so undo his whole action, and it's essentially a knas, like a fine, because he didn't listen to your instructions. That's why he loses.
But what if he tells him that the customer says dye it red or black, doesn't matter, dye it red, and the worker dyes it black. He gets it back, and now black is $500 on the market, red is $250. So the customer can actually make more money with the black garment than the red one.
So according to Rebbe Meir, you don't. It doesn't matter. The customer loses all of that because it basically the dyer messed it up and he is koned. It's his own wool now. He doesn't even give it back at all. But according to Rebbe Yehuda, which is how we paskin, then the buyer gains all that money. He got a surprise windfall because he doesn't have to pay what he initially agreed to pay, which might be $500 or $300. He only has to pay the cost of the dyer, of the expert, because he did the wrong thing. So it's a knas. We're going to get into this a little bit more tomorrow, or a lot more, I should say. But before we get to tomorrow,
in one case the dyer keeps the thread, in the other case
according to Rabbi Meir, the dyer keeps the thread, right? It's as if you stole it. It is stolen, essentially, and you basically don't remember. We always say you pay back the value at the time you stole it. If you steal something that goes up in value, remember, if you steal a cow and it gets to be worth more, you pay back at the time you stole it, not the higher value.
But then Rabbi Yehuda says the customer keeps the thread.
According to Rabbi Meir, the dyer, the uman, the expert keeps the thread.
Rabbi Yehuda says the customer.
Sorry, what?
Rabbi Yehuda, though, says the
Correct.
customer.
Rabbi Yehuda says it's the customer and he has to pay, but what he pays depends on the lesser of the increased value or the cost. Okay? Ask the Gemara the first question, which is again not just a technicality. My kior, we said you dyed it. I said I translated the Mishnah weekly, but what does that mean? Kior. Amr of Nachman Rabba Bar Chana, last line, kalbus. You did it kalbus. What does that mean? My kalbus. Again, Amar Rabba Bar Shmuel, it means kafra dudi. It means, Rashi understands that kafra dudi means chiper. Rashi says means that you basically scrape the vat. So basically, instead of taking fresh dye, which I think all of us have done this at some point, you take you dyed something in a dye, right? You baked it, you boiled it, sorry, and then you took out your thread, but in the pan, not the pan, in the vat is dye that remains on the side on the walls, and you basically scraped that dye off and used it again. So it was diluted essentially and bad quality. And so you use that, and therefore you did a bad job. And so that's the first case, the second case of the Mishnah, the middle case of the Mishnah, where everybody agrees that you did a poor job, and therefore yado al tachtuna, the dyer loses out, and it either is going to be you pay whatever the lesser is of the value added or the cost that was incurred, whichever was less. Tomorrow, we're going to get into many more cases about how you change the valuation and how you assess something based on how much effort and money was put into changing this thing for the better. Shavuot. Now, James had a request whether we can learn 8 o'clock tomorrow. Is 8 o'clock doable, or is it too late for the young folks?
It's great for me. PM, right?
8 p.m., correct.
Yeah.
12 p.m.
All right.
Anyone else?
I'm not going to know until tomorrow.
Just do what's best for most people. If I miss it live, I'll catch a recording.
Okay, but we hope you can make it. Don't worry about the Super Bowl, because James has assured me that 8 o'clock is going to be during halftime. And if you miss the Super Bowl, you can watch that recorded. So, okay, so we're going to try for 8 o'clock tomorrow, and God willing, pick it up from there. Okay, everyone? Shavuot Tov.
Thank
See
you.
tomorrow night.
Shavua Tov.
Thanks.
Oh my gosh. I gotta print all that.